Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marie Quinones, and I'm the Senior Marketing Programs Manager with Accurate Background. We have a great lineup of panelists for you today. Let's welcome Jeff. Jeff, please introduce yourself and who you work for.
Hey, Marie, thank you so much. Appreciate you putting this together and being able to be here. So I'm Jeff Pelicio. I'm the founder and CEO of Allied Insight. We're a growth marketing delivery company built exclusively for staffing. We also provide coaching resources for staffing firms who have internal teams or even incubator programs for staffing firms looking to establish in-house teams. So we're basically your all-in-one stop shop for all things marketing and staffing.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Pankaj, welcome.
Hi, Marie. Thank you for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pankaj. I am one of the founders of Sense. Sense is a talent engagement platform. I started the company about 6 years ago. We work with over 600 staffing companies today. And before I started Sense, I ran staffing companies for 15 years. So this is the world that I came from. Excited to be here. Thank you again.
Excited to have you. Katie, welcome, Katie.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Katie Hartley. I'm our Vice President of Customer Solutions here at Accurate Background. We are a global background screening provider in business. Actually, this is our 25th year. Started in 1997. I've been with the organization since 2002. I always joke that this is totally what I planned on doing after college. I don't know that really what we do requires much explanation, but I'm here just to represent the background screening and drug testing end of the onboarding process. So happy to be part of this panelist group and joining this webinar today.
Thank you so much, Katie. And last but not least, Jeff Jefferson.
Thanks, Marie. My name is Jeff Jefferson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Employdrive. And we are a payroll benefits administration and ACA compliance vendor, an outsourced payroll exclusively for the staffing industry. I personally have been in staffing and around staffing for over 20 plus years. So I really appreciate you guys having me on the call today and excited to help where we can.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you all online for virtually joining us today. Today, we will be discussing your 2022 priorities from candidate to hire and beyond. In 2021, recruiters were focused to recruit from a hybrid talent landscape and adopt digital new recruiting methods in this new candidate-centric market. But as we enter 2022 in the midst of this great migration period, our time to reprioritize and refocus is now. In a world where there are more jobs than candidates, recruiting top talent is becoming increasingly competitive. Boasting your company culture isn't enough to attract and retain your talent anymore. Automation and integrated workflows are key to ensuring that seamless candidate experience. With new market trends and norms constantly changing, one thing remains the same, and that's candidate experience. Companies that seek to adapt and exceed the candidate's expectation will outperform your competition and maximize the potential. Today, we're going to focus on turning your hiring challenges into priorities, from candidate to hire and beyond. Today, we're going to kick off the panel with processes and technology. As we shift to remote work, staffing firms had to quickly put in place processes to adhere to this new normal. But the challenge is that those processes were put in place with the mindset that they would be temporary. So Jeff, how do you align your processes with communication and technology?
Sorry, I was muted. Another thing that we've all experienced from being in more remote work. So fantastic question. When it comes to the reality of staffing firms over the last couple of years, there was a lot of pivoting in order to, for self-preservation, to make sure that they were able to last long enough to get through all the chaos. And I think with a lot of those changes, as you mentioned, many thought they were just temporary changes and that they wouldn't be reflective of where things would be headed in the future. Unfortunately, in making those adjustments, not many staffing agencies took the time to really revisit what it is that they had in place from a process and technology perspective. So when they made these amendments, it was only in terms of being able to cover a given period of time, to which then they would be able to go back. That's created a lot of manual processes for organizations, which is starting to now become too cumbersome to handle. So the process is really, really simple. It takes the time to go back through, revisit your client and candidate journeys that you've already mapped out from pre-pandemic stages, include those adjustments that you've made to the very real market that we're experiencing today, that will likely be here for the foreseeable future, and make the adjustments back into your automation, into your technology, and identify any of the gaps that you might have within the framework of your organization. Those will all sort of point to where you might have like lack of efficiencies, or where you might have drop off or friction in the funnel that is going to reduce your conversion ratios, as well as, you know, challenge maybe some of the people to continue through and create additional churn as they go through your process.
That's great. I think that's exactly true. Does anyone
Thanks.
have anything else to add?
Sorry, one of the things I was going to say was, I talk about this quite a lot. You know, the fact that everybody was on a digital transformation journey, right? I mean, some people were much further along, some people were just getting started. One of the things that the pandemic did is it basically precipitated that for everybody. You could no longer avoid it. You immediately had to do a technology transformation. You know, people overnight found out that not only are you no longer able to stay in touch with your talent or candidates that you were meeting before, you can't even stay in touch with your own staff. You can't even stay in touch with your customers. So you were no longer essentially meeting anybody. And how were you going to give everybody the same personalized white glove experience that you were hoping to differentiate your company on, right? So the pandemic, I think, helped precipitate digital transformation. That's one of the things that happened. Now, to Jeff's point, you know, for some people, this happened in a hurry. This happened without any process, without any thinking. I know tons and tons of companies who did this very thoughtfully, where they essentially went, what are all the processes today that are repetitive and how can they be automated? Which ones of these are of no value to us because they're basically just busy time? And which are the ones where we actually can mimic our best recruiter, mimic our best account manager, and then say, hey, this person does this. Our automated process is going to do this for all the other 500 account managers that we have. And I think some of those changes are here to stay. They are not going away. Companies have already seen ROI from it. Companies have already seen this leads to more placements. This leads to happier candidates. This leads to happier customers, so on and so forth. But then, of course, things that you just did in a hurry, which, you know, didn't need to be automated or could actually give you a way to connect with your people whenever the world fully opens up and we are able to do that. I think those are the ones that'll retract, and that's when people will start rethinking about, do we need to automate those processes, or are those the ones that are best served by an in-person interaction? So that's my sort of viewpoint on this.
I know for us, it's continuing to focus on mobile first as it relates to the background check, and being as proactive in collecting information as we can be, because, you know, historically, when I started in this industry years ago, employers would screen multiple candidates in there that were up for any given job, right, as an elimination tool. It wasn't something that was being done post-hire. So now that it's post-hire, speed is of the essence, but not only that, with a remote workforce or a more remote workforce due to the pandemic, being able to engage with candidates through their mobile devices and in a proactive way, meaning present to them all the things that are required upfront, be proactive. Speed to hire is even more critical. I think where we also saw probably some of the biggest challenges was with things like drug testing too, because with the pandemic, a lot of the same clinics that conduct drug testing were also doing testing for COVID. All of the same labs that conduct drug testing were testing for COVID. So that supply chain was greatly impacted. So we've seen a lot of employers also sort of shift how they handle that, and more employers moving to oral testing, and oral testing through video. Just very, you know, things that, to your point, were done rapidly, but are probably here to stay, right?
Yeah.
So continuing to focus, I think, on mobile first and and really making sure we're not chasing information after the candidate engages with our process, but instead being proactive in our collection on that first stop is very critical to our piece of the process and for the
Katie, I was
employer
gonna
and the
say-
candidate.
Sorry, I was going to say, you probably even have thoughts on, a lot of our customers talked about like remote I-9 verification.
Oh yeah, and the notary network. Yep.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, how did that change?
Oh, it was the same. I mean, there was the challenges with getting the full I-9 form executed was rampant because you had people that couldn't come into the office anymore to execute on the second signature, right? And the witness. So the notary network was used more than ever, but the government also changed and relaxed some of the rules, especially during the peak pandemic times when things were really closed down. And I think a lot of that will continue to move in a more electronic fashion, right? And for the better. I mean, there are some positives there, right? Because the more, let's be honest, the candidate pool wants to engage in an electronic way. They
Right.
also want to choose their destination, whether that's drug testing or getting their I-9 form completed.
Yeah.
If I'm a candidate, I want to be able to schedule that stuff on my mobile and choose how far I have to go or where I have to go to get it done. So
Thank
all
you.
of those things from a technology standpoint continue to be vitally important.
And
Yeah,
Jeff?
the one thing I'll add to that, just from a technology perspective, obviously it forced small and mid-sized companies, obviously, to become more automated and adopt technology. And what we found is when, it forced them because they identified those gaps in their processes, because you've got, someone who's working from home that's processing payroll, the time cards are coming in all sorts of different ways. They weren't on any sort of secure network. They're just on a Wi-Fi at their house, right? And there's no VPNs or any of that sort of stuff. So the infrastructure, companies had to beef that up. We saw that multiple times on our conversions. That clients just had no concept of the amount of compliance issues that they could face because socials are going out over regular email and bank accounts and those sort of things, right? So not only adopting the technology, but making sure the infrastructure is in place so that the technology is complying with all of the data protection rules that are out there. We see that all the time, and it's scary as all get out.
It sounds like one consistent theme from all of our panelists is about being proactive. So I know in the midst of all of this, we're trying to react to everything that's happening, but if companies can proactively adhere to new technologies and processes, that seems like if we're expecting what's going to come ahead, that will essentially help, move companies forward. So I don't know if that's kind of the gist or maybe the summary of what you guys were talking about. And let's move forward, talking about being proactive. And, we mentioned the candidate a couple of times and what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the candidate pool. With more jobs than candidates right now, companies are experiencing either a feast or a famine. Pankaj, how do you address the famine where companies aren't applying, but then also the feast where you're sifting through the volume?
Yeah, no, great question, Marie. This is quite central to what we talk about here at Sense, right? I mean, pretty much all of our customers, every single one of them is talking about how they have open jobs, but no candidates are applying. Now, in the middle of the pandemic, part of it had got to do with, well, people were worried about the pandemic, then they had unemployment, then they had supplemental unemployment, and you could just sit at home, which then finally, so many sort of weeks and months of sitting at home gave birth to, am I doing the right job? I just want to change my career. And that kind of gave way to the Great Resignation. So, what's the statistics that are shocking now are we have customers telling us that they have manufacturing plants where they have 5,000 positions open and they can't find a single person. So, the entire facility has to shut down because they can't find enough number of people. So that's what we're talking about from a famine standpoint. You put out a job and not enough people are responding to it. Now, what are you going to do as a company, right? I mean, if you were used to putting a job out there and have 10 people apply to you, and now there are only 2 people apply, you're not going to automatically have 5 times the number of recruiters try to fill this job. So that's where technology comes to help you. One of the things we've seen help a lot in this is what's popularly called a chatbot, but essentially a conversational recruiting assistant. What you can do with in the situation of a of a famine is cast a wider net. You could reach out to 1,000 people instead of reaching out to 50 people and say, hey, this is the job we're looking to fill. Everybody gets a link that they sort of click on and simply just answer 5 or 6 very, very quick questions in less than 30 seconds. Are you authorized to work in the US? Have you ever been in a felony? Will you subject yourself to a COVID screening every day? Can you stand on your feet for 8 hours a day? Can you pick 50 pounds at one go? You know, assuming you were finding a picker packer. So obviously your questions will differ based on the job. But if there was somebody who clicked on this link, replied to all these 5 questions accurately, technology will immediately throw them a scheduling module and say, great, I'm going to have you talk to Katie, or I'm going to have you talk to Stephanie at, you know, a time of your choosing that works for you. And you're now scheduled on this recruiter's calendar. So we've seen this being super helpful, where also because of remote work, it doesn't really matter where you're located. So if you cast a wider net, you're just going to find people. Now, conversely, if you have a feast, and very few people will tell you that they have a feast going on right now, where you put out a position and instead of 10 people applying, 500 people are applying to you. Again, you can't have 10 times the number of recruiters sifting through those resumes. So same exact thing, the conversational recruiting assistant comes in to help you, right? I mean, it's the same exact situation where this bot, if you will, can talk to 500 people, pick the top 5 candidates and have only those 5 candidates talk to your recruiter. And oftentimes you're submitting these people within 30 seconds to a minute. We have customers challenging us now where they essentially say they, in light industrial situations, they want to go from hello to hire in 30 minutes. So somebody comes to their website. This is the person that they've never met before. For the first time, they're saying hello, talks to a bot, gets thrown a job at them, says, I like the job, and gets submitted to that job, and actually either just gets hired or gets scheduled with a recruiter, to Katie's world, where somebody would be like, hey, I got to do your I-9 verification and this and that, but otherwise you have a job. So anyway, this is, I think, the biggest topic right now, which is how do you, first of all, build a talent pool? And then second, for people who've over the last 10, 20 years have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building a candidate pool from job boards, how do you mine that talent pool to fill the positions you have open now?
That's great.
You know, to piggyback on this, I mean, what we're really talking about, again, is like adapting, right? So as the environment has shifted, the things that we did yesterday, they're not going to be as effective today. And so this is where you have things like, in those famine situations, you have companies that are really pressing on like recruitment marketing, right? So being a little bit more clever about how it is that you're doing your distribution of jobs. It isn't a matter of just going out and pushing these jobs out onto job boards anymore. Like now it's a matter of like really seeking out where these audiences live. And so, you know, using technology to be able to cater to them and to deliver to them in real time, to give them the responses that they want when they want them is critically important. But it's also really important to make sure that you know where these people live. And then to also sort of back that up, you also do have to understand what they need when they need it. So the creating sort of those automated tools or working within automated tools in order to be able to create the Q&A or the responsorial elements to help qualify is fantastic in moving people through. But you also have to do things to educate and sort of give them, it's feeding them fish and sort of teaching them the fish at the same time, right? So give them those tools and resources so that way they also see you as a resource for them. You know, I see a lot of my clients right now are really focusing heavily on trying to identify these different subgroups in all these different areas where candidates are living, where they're talking, where they're commiserating about either the experiences that they're having, the challenges that they're facing, or even, you know, passing along opportunities that might be out there in the marketplace. And they're finding ways to sort of drop messaging in, to participate more in those environments and be seen as a greater resource to that group that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been heard.
Yeah, I know for us, it's about, when it comes to our role, and again, most commonly these days, our role is post-hire, right? Or post-offer, rather. So the candidate has already been offered the role. We're under the gun to get the background check done so they can get in the door and start the job. So any efficiencies we can build into our process to make that as seamless and painless for the candidate and the recruiter is key, right? So being proactive in what we collect is critical, but also, the data we collect, making sure that we're only requesting the minimum data we need based on the requirements of that background check. But also with our partners, our partner network, the applicant tracking systems, the HRIS systems, really mapping as much data as we can from that job application into our system so the candidate's not duplicating their data entry from one system into another. Instead, they're just filling in the blanks on what we might need to supplement the background check and have a thorough result. So all of those, what might seem like little efficiency gains, create a much better candidate experience and make our turnaround time on getting those candidates to respond to us much faster.
Yeah, it compounds. It compounds.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and obviously I have a little bit of a different sort of take on that. Feast or famine for us is no difference, right? If it's feast or famine, you have to pay people correctly and give them a good experience once they're on your, on your payroll. And really that, from our perspective, especially in, the famine market, if you're not paying your people correctly, they're less likely to be a referral source or help you with, talking you up to the customer, that sort of thing. People who have worked for you in the past aren't going to come back and work for you again, right? It's the whole idea that staffing is one of the only businesses where you get your payroll wrong and your revenue is impacted, right? So they have to get paid correctly and on time, and you have to have systems and internal staff and vendors in place that are also, committed to that end. But for us, it doesn't change, right? The back office has to be, locked down, whether you're just slamming jobs and just going, or you can't find anybody.
Right.
You got to pay the folks that are on the book correctly, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say something.
Sorry, Pankaj, yes, we actually had a question come up for you.
Oh, okay.
So Eva would like to know, how does a chatbot, how can that be set up? Is that something that you work with your clients to put together, and who comes up with the link?
Yeah, so super straightforward. First of all, your customer success manager, if you already work with Sense today, can help set this up for you. You actually have 100% authority over building your own chatbot. So you actually just design your own workflow. Hey, these are the 5 questions I'd like to ask people who are applying for this kind of job versus 7 questions to people who are asking for this kind of a job. We'll design it for you. And then the system automatically generates a link. So once we build the chatbot would have a link. And that's the link, like I said, you can send out to 10,000 people at a time, 1 million people at a time. You can send it via email, you can send it via text message. So it all happens automatically, but obviously you just completely own the natural language on it. And what questions do you want to ask? And what's your flow chart? Like, hey, have you ever gotten a felony? Yes. Well, do you want to immediately go to you're rejected? Or you want to send them a polite message and say, this job might not be a fit for you, but go look someplace else? All that happens automatically.
It would also be a really good opportunity too, to like drop in a chatbot within a campaign in order to help revitalize people in your database too, right? Like if you have a dormant database, especially if you're dealing with these famines today, like segment that database down, find out who the dormant individuals are, run them into a campaign, let a chatbot go through the process of creating them into qualified candidates, and then start bringing them through a pipeline where you already have your open jobs.
That is absolutely correct. So when we build chatbots in Sense today, they're actually of 2 different kinds. One is pre-screening, which is kind of what I've been talking about. And the second one's called database enrichment. So you literally can send it to, like you said, Jeff, 1 million people. The first question you want to ask all these million people are you looking for a job? And maybe only 5% of the people will respond and say yes. And those are the 50,000 you care about. And then you'll be like, great, when would you be available? This week, next month? And then you go from there to, well, we don't seem to have your updated email, zip code, how much money do you want, and basically enrich your database.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
Guys, this is a great segue into our next question. I know we talked a lot about building efficiencies into your processes to address both feast and famine. Again, different viewpoints from everybody, but all those little efficiencies, like Katie mentioned, they really add up. So whether that's, removing or creating efficiencies within your recruitment marketing or helping somebody upload a chatbot. We're going to talk next about those efficiencies and as they relate to inaccuracies and discrepancies. If you don't have efficiencies, you're going to end up with inaccuracies and discrepancies. So Katie, how can you reduce those discrepancies in the hiring process?
Well, I always love this question because I mean, in background screening, this comes up so
A
much.
lot, yeah.
And what it always surprises me that a lot of people don't realize that as a consumer reporting agency, which Accurate is, we're federally mandated under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to ensure maximum possible accuracy in our results. That is literally in the law. But that aside, we have to leverage technology to get there, right? And I won't bore you with how it was done in the early 2000s or the late 90s or even before that, because the technology wasn't there. But these days, technology definitely helps us. Now, obviously, we still have to rely on a global network to an extent, and audits, some of the old school ways of ensuring accuracy. But we lead with technology first, and how that's done, and I'm sure it's true for many parts of the process, is through data validation. So even simple things like double keying a social security number, right? And validating that it's not 1 through 9 or all 9s or all 8s can save a lot of time in the process and eliminate an inaccurate background check from the very beginning. Date validations in a person's chronological employment history. Seems minor, but if you know an employer wants to verify previous employment for X amount of years for different job roles, being able to handle that in your technology and say, okay, based on this chronological series of dates, my technology knows that I need to process this employment verification versus cancel it, because this particular employer or this particular job role doesn't require that level of employment verification. So those kinds of technology capabilities not only ensure accuracy and process improvement, but they also eliminate bias in your hiring process, right? So they ensure that for different job roles, you're running the same level of background check on each person that's offered that same job role. And so it's a vital part of what we do, right? There's so many facets to accuracy, but those are some of the key things. In addition to just algorithms and lots of things buried in the technology that confirm checks and balances to make sure that what we're getting back from our sources globally makes sense. On the flip side, there are reporting laws too, right? So if we're getting a person's criminal history back, right, knowing whether or not we can even report that based on law is important. So those, again, date validations, things like that, all lead to a statement for accuracy, because there are rules around what we can report as well. So any automation we can build and take out of humans' hands definitely makes for a better candidate experience. It protects the employers in the long run from using bad information in the hiring process. But I think the bigger benefit is, again, consistent hiring practices based on job role, and especially here in the US, where there is a very, very hard focus from the EEOC on making sure that the kinds of background checks that are being run on people have a very close nexus to the type of work that they're doing. So.
Yep. And from our perspective, as that, that data is collected and the recruiting process, as it's sort of rolling downhill, right, into payroll, if, like you're talking about validation, and if your front office systems don't have that capability, right, you're not getting those dates validated, and the states are just a free-form text field, that sort of stuff. When that comes through, especially when we're connecting, right, because the whole idea is that we're going to connect to those front office systems to make that back office as efficient as possible. Well, then that person doesn't show up. And I apologize if I'm repeating myself. If you don't pay people correctly, right, that's bad, right? So, we want to do it on time. So the whole idea is identifying, what your system is capable of on the front office, right? That you're getting that data is, like you said, validating socials, validating bank accounts, 9 digits for a routing number, that sort of stuff, right? We see that come when we're doing conversions from systems that don't speak to one another, from some of the big guys, the ADPs and the Paychecks and those guys. And we see those front office, systems have none of that in place. And it takes us months to detangle that with a client. And we become almost a process consultant in that, in that relationship, because they didn't think about it before, because they're keying it in from one, paper form into one system, and there's no connectivity there. So you have to think about that, that sort of data management, right, in that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, what we are talking about is the backbone of automation, right? This whole idea of inaccuracies, discrepancies. I mean, this is the whole reason why you put automation into place, because you're essentially saying every single thing is going to be consistent. It's going to be error-free. If this is our process, if everybody needs to get a message 7 days before somebody starts an assignment, then by God, every single person is going to get that message 7 days before somebody starts, right? I mean, if everybody's going to get a message a day before they start on an assignment and say, this is where you're supposed to show up, this is the building address, this is the phone number to call if you run into any issues, then you're going to have that. If people are going to fill onboarding documents on, hey, what's your direct deposit information, it's just going to happen. So I mean, from the song that I sing, which is automation, the whole idea is, how do you get to a point where when you do this with even hundreds of thousands of people, that there is zero error, not just like acceptable error, but zero error. So, I couldn't agree more with both of you, Jeff and Katie.
It's funny. For anyone who's obviously implemented automation, you realize really quickly where your errors lie, like where your inaccuracies start, right? And it's mostly with the front. This is not like a thing, but like, as people are kind of going through and doing their process, they're trying to get as much information into the system as possible, and they want to try to expedite things as smoothly as they can. But when you use software, there's one thing that's always true. Software will always do what you tell it to do, consistently, always. So if you tell it to do this thing, whether your information going in is wrong or not, it'll either do what you expected it to do, or it'll do what you didn't expect it to do. So, and so with that, like, accuracy is super important. I always recommend, like, whenever you're doing things with automation, like, start where you think you have the most accurate information and then build out from there. My common spiel is to start at the start record, because recruiters and salespeople and hiring managers and candidates, like, they all need that information to be accurate at that point, and then kind of build outwardly. But just keep in mind, especially in like odd markets like we have today, but just in general, like, people are fickle and there are options out there. And so if your process provides the least amount of friction, then you'll likely be able to not only obtain them, but retain them, and continue them along that journey, even beyond, as Jeff was mentioning, when it comes to things like redeployment and advocacy. Like, those are really critical points at which you can really excel past your competition. So accuracy here is not just a play to make sure that your software works properly, which is really important. But outside of that, this is really part of your brand. And so, how is your brand to be seen, and how do you want to be measured against your competition?
That's a great, I guess, kind of concluding point as we kind of wrap up the inaccuracies and discrepancies, moving to automation. So we touched on that a lot during this part, and that's how you really kind of remove and mitigate that risk within discrepancies. So with automation and onboarding, probably one of the biggest challenges, but also priorities within your hiring strategy. There's recruiter automation, there's automated workflow, there's chatbots, there's marketing automation. How do you implement automation in onboarding, Pankaj?
Okay, so how much time do you will have? Honestly, this is something I can talk all day, but I'm going to try and break this down into the 3 or 4 things that you talked about, Marie. First of all, we all know why onboarding is super important, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of studies out there that tell you people decide in the first 24 hours if they're going to stick with your company. People decide in the first 1 week if they're going to be a loyal employee, because, first impression is really what counts. But from an automation standpoint, I mean, there are a number of other things that automation allows you to do during your onboarding process. So first of all, if you are part of a staffing company, you're probably marred by this statistic that even if you made 100 people an offer, so everything's done, you've actually gone through the interview process, you've negotiated compensation, they've all said yes, you made 100 offers, they've accepted, you're still only going to have 80 or 90 people start 2 weeks later. You're still going to lose people after what you thought everything was done. And part partly you're losing these people because of lack of engagement. I can't tell you the number of stories where we have where, somebody accepted an offer, and now from the offer date to start date, there's a 2-week period. And in this 2-week period, forward-thinking companies are reaching out to this candidate 6 different times. They're essentially going, hey, congratulations, you got this job, super excited to have you start 2 weeks from now. Then a week later, they're like, oh, by the way, this is the LinkedIn profile of your hiring manager. This is the person you'll be working with in case you wanted to know something more. 2 days later, oh, by the way, this is where you need to show up, blah, 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 right? The reason they are doing this is twofold. One, automation will trigger for you and say, hey, you sent this person 3 messages. They haven't opened, clicked, or read any of those messages. Guess what? They're already disengaged. They're probably not showing up. At this point, you immediately want your recruiters to pick up the phone, call this individual, and 90% of the time they'll tell you, hey, I got something else. Only 10% of the time would they be like, oh, sorry, I missed all your messages, because that rarely happens in the world we live in today, right? So one, you are able to reduce your attrition, because if you knew beforehand this person is leaving, you can go talk to the hiring manager and say, can we send you a replacement? And the hiring manager is vulnerable. They want somebody to start 3 days from now. They've already planned for it. They'll probably take a replacement. So first of all, before you even get to onboarding, there is this idea of actually making sure more people get onboarded. Then, of course, when you go through onboarding, you want to have a consistent process. We talked about that in the last segment, but I'll go a step further. A lot of forward-thinking companies today are now marrying all of their background check processes, onboarding document processes into an automation system. So while I'm going to say, hey, candidate, welcome to our company, the next message is going to be click here and go over to Accurate to go your background. Click here and go over to Employdrive to fill in your direct deposit information. So we're sending them on different sort of paths, but we're still the one entity that is staying automated with them and saying, great, this information has been now received and written back into the system of record. They can keep moving forward into the automation process. And then, of course, once you get somebody onboarded, they get started, then starts the difficult job of making sure that they don't go into a black hole. This is the bane of the staffing industry, right? I mean, everybody, you've heard these stories from your friends. My staffing company doesn't care about me. They only think I'm a paycheck to them. The fact that once people start on an assignment, engagement just tapers off dramatically. And that's where, Marie, to your point, automated workflows come in. We're going to ask 100% of the people at the end of day 1, how was your first day? On a scale of 1 to 5, simple question. I can't tell you how powerful it is, because 60% of the time, people are going to come back and say 4 or 5, my day was awesome. And you send them a different message and say, that's amazing to hear. Send us your size and your address. We want to send you a company t-shirt. These people already love you. Turn them into a brand ambassador, have them wearing your apparel and walking around. And then the 40% who say 1, 2, or 3, my day sucked. The last thing they want to hear from you is, do you want a t-shirt, right? I mean, those are the people you basically reach out to and say, so sorry to hear that. Somebody's going to be calling you in 10 minutes. And then you call them and figure out that most people have the same issues. Hey, my hiring manager wasn't ready. My email wasn't ready. I didn't have a laptop. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just twiddling my thumbs. But if you know this early on, you can fix this before it becomes a festering problem. So anyway, I mean, I kind of keep coming back to the fact that once you are consistent in your process, you can keep up leveling your process every single day and just make it absolutely the best white glove experience you can provide to your people. Sorry, I can keep going.
I thought that was like a mic drop. I thought that was like pretty incredible. I was mesmerized.
We talked a little bit, or Pankaj talked a little bit about, closing it off with automated workflows. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, but Katie, would you like to speak to kind of the automated workflows within and how background checks fit into that?
Sure. And yeah, I mean, I think really I've talked a lot about how we do that upfront when the candidate's first engaging and making sure we're proactive in the information we collect from the candidate. I think it's equally true, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but on the back end, right, when the results close, it's also important that as we score the results of the background check, that we are automated and proactive in pushing that score back to our partners, right? Because being able to automatically say, yes, this background check passed based on your criteria for this job role and this package, right? The specific background check package for this job role. Let me revise that statement. and push that score of pass, and I'm using air quotes, or whatever your language is, meets requirements, however you want, green light, whatever the words are, and push it back to the applicant tracking system so that the applicant tracking system or whatever system you're using of record can automate that onboarding flow from that point forward is also vitally important, right? Because without, again, it's all about removing as many bottlenecks as you can and as many manual touch points as you can. There's always going to be, and one other point on that, I think you have to continuously review those scoring matrices too, because what I always find interesting is how often we've got clients reviewing their background checks and consistently passing the same thing over and over again, where technology could pass it for them, right? If you're always going to pass that first time driving under the influence, for example, or, and maybe that's a bad example and I just didn't have a better one today, but if you're always going to pass the same thing over and over again, save yourself the review time and work with your partner to automate that score, right? Because there can be negative things that come up on a background check that just always pass your policy. So you should be consistently reviewing that at least once a year, if not twice a year, to make sure that what's going to your review for pass or fail on the background check, you know, may need to be automated.
Jeff, from your perspective, onboarding and automation, how would you chime into this as well?
Yeah, it's funny because we see this all the time. You know, staffing companies using non-staffing specific technology for onboarding, you know, or just shoehorning some, you know, other product. You know, we are firm believers, having built and sold an onboarding tool, you know, firm believers that onboarding tool needs to be closely connected to your ATS, right? Because there's so much data across you've got placement data, you've got onboarding data, you've got job and candidate, you've got all these different entities that have to come together and be super efficient, right? So that's our take on it, is if you're not using a staffing specific onboarding tool, and you've got, you know, we had a client who they have to have an NDA signed prior to going on an interview, right? Because they were going to a marketing department, right? And you have to do that pre-hire, right? So that's not even onboarding, but it has to be connected to that, you know, to that ATS. We detangle those quite a bit, where they're using, you know, like a Paychex or an ADP for onboarding, and then they've got, you know, PDFs going out on the side, right? Or using PandaDoc or something like that to, you know, do something off the reservation, and then they're keying it all back in again on the back end. So, you know, from our perspective, if you're not using something connected to your ATS, you have to look at that.
And, you know, just to like chime in like one last little bit, like obviously, you know, onboarding is back office, and it's typically an area that I don't have a whole lot of that I don't play in often. Probably a good thing. But with that said, like the things that you build from a back office perspective, as far as I'm concerned, those are all marketing materials to differentiate who your company is going forward. And so the more efficient your back office is, the tighter and the more seamless that that experience can be, the shorter your hiring cycles are, the more you can take that data and flex it and use it to promote your company and differentiate yourself in the marketplace. So you can look at things like, you know, the fact that your hiring cycle is very short, the fact that you do have smooth onboarding, the fact that you do communicate these things all the way through. All of those are differentiators for you in the marketplace to help you edge out in front of your competition. And also, like, please, please, please train your people on what's going on, right? When you put these things in place, whether it is that you're bringing through Employdrive or Sense or Accurate or Allied Insight, whatever it is that you're using, like make sure that your team knows how they should be using those tools and how they should be using those resources so that they get implemented properly. And so that way they're aware of what the process changes are. If you don't train everybody in your group to understand how onboarding is supposed to look, or how automation is supposed to look, or how background checks are supposed to work, then you're going to end up with discrepancies. You're going to end up with inaccuracies. You're going to have friction in the funnel, and you're going to end up with churn.
Jeff, thanks for always providing like a rounded recap.
The bookend.
It's great. I love it. And I think as we take all of that, you know, like Jeff said, and not to reiterate, you know, but it's that data, you know, it's helping all of these companies here are staffing focused and helping you take that data and apply it to your hiring strategy. But not only that, take it and apply it to your growth strategy. So you have all this data. How is it going to help you move forward? So you put together your hiring strategy, but we're going to shift focus here a little bit and talk about how that helps with your growth strategy. So, we touched a little bit on redeployments and advocacy and ambassadorship. But Jeff, once an employee is hired, how do you keep those candidates, or how do you keep those employees on payroll, utilizing some of the different things that we've talked about?
Yeah, great question. I think, and again, I'm repeating myself, right? Payroll in the world of staffing is a very nuanced operation, right? And so you have to get it done correctly, and you have to get it done on time. And that's just a zero fail mission, right? You have to do that, right? So that one's easy. But the automation, so like, there are certain industries obviously where you're not going to be able to automate, time collection, right? But as much as you can, you have to do that, because for me, kind of pushing what happens in the back office kind of onto the front office was always a no-no, right? When I ran my shop and I heard a recruiter making phone calls all day on Monday to get time cards, it made my skin crawl, right? The system should be able to automate, the nudge to get a time card, right? So obviously, it's to Jeff's point on the last, conversation, you have to train, right? Your recruiters, your account reps, instead of making phone calls about, time cards, they're continuing to build those relationships, right? Getting referrals, who's interviewing, at the client site, getting referrals for friends who are looking for work, that sort of thing. And then of course, on the back office and in terms of how you run your sort of HRIS program, right? There's tons of options, specifically to staffing that give you the ability to offer really good benefits, right? You have, 401k providers for small and mid-sized and larger, staffing firms. So I think you have to look at that whole operation. You want people to come back to work for you, but, I've always said, and being in sales, it's always easier to keep an employee or to keep a customer than it is to go out and get a new one. It's always less expensive, right? So if in the back office, you're utilizing the tools that are available to keep people as happy as possible, and then using your front office to continue to engage those folks, I think that's the way you sort of get that compounding, in staffing, right? You're just building that book, right?
I would say too, from a background screening standpoint, and really it pertains more to redeployment, I think, than keeping people engaged, especially in staffing. The background screening world post-hire is pretty nuanced, because it can depend on the job role, it can depend on the type of work they're going to be doing. For example, in healthcare, you might need to monitor that employee. There might be monitoring tools out there to monitor whether or not they're keeping up with their professional licenses, and that those haven't expired. You might want to monitor to make sure there's no sanctions that have popped up. As a healthcare professional, there's monitoring tools just to check the different federal and state licensing boards to make sure there's been no sanctions taken against that employee. On the logistics front, there's driver monitoring too. So if you're staffing for drivers, you might want to be monitoring your driver pool to make sure that there's nothing coming up on their driving records. But again, it's more about redeployment. Now, if you've got employees that you're redeploying from one client to another, you can also consider and work with your background screening partner on what the different package requirements are from client to client, and how it might look if you need to do some ad hoc background checks to move one employee from, redeploy an employee from one client to another. For example, maybe your prior background check was just done, and now you're moving that employee somewhere else, and the only thing needed is a driving record to supplement that previous background check, and the time has been minimal. So understanding those nuances and looking at the program through that lens is very important when it comes to post-hire engagement and how those programs look. I know from all of my years in this industry, we've seen it done a number of ways, even from just routine checks on an annual basis. Those of us that work at Accurate have to get routine checks. I think it's every 2 years that we get checked, but that's just part of our accreditation standard. So we could talk about all the different options from a post-hire standpoint, but most of it would pertain to the background check itself and what's necessary. And it is nuanced based on situation. So the details matter, like in most cases, but certainly in a post-hire world, especially with staffing and largely tied to redeployment of an employee, probably from one client to another and how that looks.
And with redeployment, Pankaj, can you speak a little bit to retention rates as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say redeployment is probably the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to automation. This was literally the basis at which every customer in the beginning came to us, because people would come to us and say our redeployment rate is 3%, 4%. It's that dismal. So imagine a $1 billion organization that does 10,000 placements a year. They will be able to retain only 300 of those people, and they'll lose 9,700, which means all of their recruiters, all of their branch offices, they're literally just running on a treadmill trying to backfill these positions, and they're barely growing in revenue. And the reason I say it's a low hanging fruit is because we lose out on redeployment just because of inconsistency in our processes. Some recruiters are really good. They're reaching out to people 30, 45, 60 days before they're finishing an assignment and talking to them, and others aren't, right? So here are some examples of how you can automate redeployment. First of all, you just make this a process that if somebody is in IT or engineering, 30 days before, 45 days before they're about to finish an assignment, you're automatically going to send them an email and say, your assignment's finishing. Let's talk about what else can we get for you. If you're in light industrial or commercial, you do that 15 days before, 10 days before, whatever your situation might be. Second, using technology, and we build some of this now. Using technology, you can also do automated job matching. So you can actually say, not only am I noticing that you're coming up on your assignment in 30 days, here are 4 other jobs that are a good fit for you. All you have to do is reply to this message with 1 and 3, and I'll submit you to job number 1 and job number 3. That's it. I'm taking all the hard work, all the guesswork out of this for you. And human beings are inherently lazy, right? If you feel like, oh, somebody's taking care of me, somebody's helping me, they're probably fine. If you don't do that, that's when you are at the risk of having this person search job boards, going to your competitor, you are in the danger of leaving them. So Marie, to your point, if you can improve redeployment rates, and if you go to our website, you'll see case studies after case studies of people who've improved these by 10x, you're going to automatically improve your retention rates, because here is a company that was losing 80% of their people, and now they're only losing 50% of their people. And the second thing I was going to say was this whole idea of advocacy and ambassadorship. You're always going to lose some people, right? Some people are just going to want to do a different thing. But that doesn't mean that you have to stop staying in touch with them. We almost morbidly use this term cradle to grave, right? I mean, anytime somebody leaves your company, you still nurture them. You still stay in touch with them. You still wish them happy holidays and Merry Christmas and whatnot. You can still reach out to them and say, hey, we're looking to hire somebody who looks like you. Maybe you're not available, but can you refer somebody else and we'll pay you $500? And here is somebody who is still making money off of your company just because you maintained this ambassadorship. And you'd be surprised how many of these people would come back and work for your company either 6 months later or 6 years later. So, very sort of small world, but if you start giving everybody that consistent white glove service, you're absolutely going to do better than the rest. And I think to our viewers, they probably will agree with this, because companies that are growing rapidly, that are best staffing firms to work with, blah, 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 they all depict these traits, right? So this isn't just me talking in a vacuum. This is everybody sort of looking at these companies and saying, well, these are the 4 things they do better.
And Jeff, I'm going to let you close it out.
I couldn't agree more. If you want redeployments, advocacy, ambassadorships, if you want that to be a process, you have to make it. Right. So a lot of the people that are probably listening right now and will listen to this afterwards, they can probably identify the redeployments. They can probably identify individuals that are in their ecosystem that have been identified as either ambassadors or have provided good advocacy for the company. But if you want this to be a notable, measurable metric within your staffing agency, it requires you to build it. Even like a referral program, Pankaj just mentioned, doing a certain amount of outreach and then asking for referrals. Maybe you're not interested, but maybe someone who is, and we can give you $500 for that lead if they get hired and if they have certain qualifications. But even all of those ifs that I'm stating, that's all a built product. It's something that you have to build within your organization. So, if you're listening and you're counting redeployments, advocacies, referrals, and ambassadorship, but you don't actually have it written down, it's not actually a policy, then I would argue I wouldn't lean on it. But I would also say, take the advice of the people that are on this panel. They're telling you ways that you can go back in, looking at the thing that you have, your asset, which is your database. And they're giving you very real gems here that you can use to go back in and find new revenue streams that maybe you hadn't considered before. And they've identified different ways that you could reduce churn that maybe you didn't identify before. And for those companies for those staffing agencies who are dealing with a famine today, those are ways that you can start getting ahead of that famine. Those are ways that you can start accelerating your revenue, and you can start getting a little closer to that goal to get yourself out of the hole that we unfortunately all have been able to see happen over the last couple of years.
I just want to thank you guys so much. And we only have about 4 minutes left. So again, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for all 4 of our panelists. You've been great today. We're going to move on to our Q&A session. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to start with the first one. Rena is new to the staffing world. But the majority of the clients that they see, they're now facing the challenge to automate hiring process with a friendly platform that gives a smooth experience for the candidate and solid compliance. So it says for 1 year, they've started up in the gig economy offering daily shifts. And that was the case because it was easier to hire. Everyone was a contractor. But now the majority of their clients need more than daily shifts. So now they're facing the challenge to automate the onboarding and hiring process. So that's one of the questions from Rena. And Pankaj, you want to take this question?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I don't mean this to be a sense commercial, but my simple answer for you is, give us a call, give us a shout. We can certainly show you how we can automate a lot of the onboarding processes. What you are describing is probably 98% of our customers, which is, folks that just hire contractors that are not really gig workers or just like daily shift workers. So this idea of hiring short-term, medium-term, long-term contractors that work from a week to a month to a year, that's exactly where we excel. So, happy to take this offline with you and give you a lot more information.
And then we have one additional question. We have 2. We'll see if we have time for both. One is, how do you identify the gaps in your hiring process? How do you identify those gaps or those challenges?
Yep, Jeff, go for it.
I was actually going to say, so much of that goes right back to your journeys, right? And I know that, it's funny. We actually did a webinar with Sense, with Wendy and I, where we said we weren't going to mention journeys ever again because there were only 3 people that hadn't mapped their journeys, and I think one of them snuck into this call. But the mapping of the journeys is the thing that will help get you sort of out of that hole, right? If you don't sit down and identify what your process is, how your candidates and clients actually interact with it, and how technology lays over the top of it, you won't know. You're basically going to be it's like whack-a-mole. You're just going to be chasing one problem to the next. And as you remedy one thing, you're probably impacting 6 or 7 other things down the line. So just like when we started off this entire panel discussion, we said that the market really pushed a lot of staffing agencies to react in order to preserve their own organization and to preserve their livelihood for all their employees. In doing those reactions, they likely adjusted things down the line. And, for those who had the foresight to realize that these weren't things that were going to go away, as Pankaj had mentioned, excellent on you, and you're already ahead of the curve. But if you haven't committed to the fact that this is your new norm, 2022 is a great time to start making this your new foundation.
Yes, thank you so much, Jeff. And it looks like we are out of time. But again, I want to thank everyone today for virtually joining us. There was a quick poll at the end. If you don't mind going ahead, everyone on the call taking that poll, if you are interested in talking to any of the panelists, taking these conversations offline, please go ahead and select that on the poll right now. And again, thank you so much to our guests who virtually attended, and thank you so much to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah, this was awesome.
Thanks
guys. A lot, Marie.
Thanks
appreciate it.
Have a great
day, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.